When you want to tell a story about morality and existentialism and empathy, just add some verticality and then put some rodents at the bottom. And you'll have an excellent story for the kids. And welcome back to Nostalgia Club. It's me, American man Jino Jang, here with my two good American friends.
It's me, Uncle Sam. Michael, joined by...
Victoria, who's dead.
What a way to start this episode, when we're going to talk about this very French mouse.
And today we're...
we're talking about The Tale of Despereaux by Kate DiCamillo. We just got done talking about how we feel like we're hitting our stride with this podcast.
But today we are all very tired. But it's okay, because we're here to talk about a mouse with a sword.
Mouse with sword.
Mouse with sword.
With a needle.
Yeah.
With a little needle.
A sewing needle as a sword.
Yeah.
We decided we wanted to read Despereaux because last season when we were talking about Redwall, we were like, oh, what are some other great mouse with sword stories? And of course, the Tale of Despereaux is very iconic. But I thought it was a lot longer than it actually was. In my memory, it was like this really long book, sort of maybe a similar length as Redwall. But then I read it in like 3 to 4 hours. And I was like, oh, okay.
I'd also forgotten that it's 5 stories in one book.
Yes.
The Tale of Despereaux itself is actually very short. And then we visit 3 other tales, I think. And then they all come together in the end for one big finale.
Yeah.
More or less, yeah. There's like, I'd say 2 other big tales that form like actual parts, like books within, for our primary antagonist, Chiaroscuro. And for secondary antagonist, unwitting pawn, Miggery Sow. And then we get little asides about the Princess P and
the cook and the king.
And the soup.
And the soup.
And Gregory. Rest in peace, Gregory.
Yes.
Killed off screen. Didn't deserve that. Before we begin, Michael, Victoria, any experience with this book? Have you read it as... I mean, Victoria, you mentioned you read it as a child. What mind space were you in when you first read this book?
It's a great question. This is going to be another one of those books where I'm like, I read it, I know I read it, don't know when I read it.
Fair enough. Michael!
I believe my mom read this to my younger sister. I never read it until this actual go-through, but much like Victoria, I had the impression that it was actually much longer than it was.
Yeah. I'm sure I probably read it in elementary school, if I had to guess. I think if I read it in middle school, I would have had a better recollection of it. So I'm going to go out on a limb and say that I read it in elementary school as a wee child.
This is fair and valid. I first learned about this book when the movie came out.
Ooh.
The 3D animated movie adaptation.
Oh, yes.
Adaptation that I'm not sure anyone saw. I sure
have not
didn't.
Seen it.
But I saw trailers for it, and I loved the idea of a mouse with a sword. And so I picked up The Tale of Despereaux, read the first story, learned very quickly that it wasn't all about Despereaux, got annoyed and put it down.
Whoa.
So I did not remember any of the book past that first initial Tale of Despereaux. So the rest of it was a surprise to me.
The movie came out in 2008.
Then that's when I read it, or at least tried to. And the book surprised me because it's so very complicated. Not just structure-wise, but emotionally complicated. It's saying a lot of things. I'm going to need you guys' help here. I sat for a while last night trying to process my thoughts about this book, and I really like the book. And I know it's trying to say a lot of things, but I can't quite comprehend what those things are.
I think I feel similarly, actually.
There's a lot of nuance, there's a lot of depth, and there's a lot of poetry in the book. But it's so immaterial almost. It's so deliberately feather-like in its application. It doesn't hit you over the head with any sort of big messages. So a part of me feels like I should love it more because of that, but I can't grasp it. It's intangible to me.
I think part of that sort of tension, that back and forth of I should be into this, but also it's saying a lot and I'm not sure how to engage with it, partially comes from the fact that much of the prose, the narration is second person. It's addressing the reader as you, and it's addressing the reader distinctly as someone reading the tale. It's like directly the author or the narrator is asking you to engage with the experiences of Despereaux, of chiaroscuro, and Maigret in the prose. It asks you multiple times to take a step back and say, how would you feel in this instance? No, really, close your eyes and think about it. And okay, that's probably how this character feels. There's a lot of times where the narrator says, reader, consider this, or reader, do you know the meaning of this word? And because the tales, the multiple tales, not only of Despereaux, but the other characters have to do with, like you said, a discussion of very intangible things, feelings of heroism or love or this or that. And the fact that you have a narrator directly talking to you about these things sort of feels bracing. The book is actively putting the impetus on you to think about this stuff. And this stuff the stuff it asks you to think about don't have clear answers. They're just more or less experiences.
That's actually really helpful because then by that analysis, this is a book about empathy.
Yeah.
It's about teaching or experiencing othering and empathy for the othered, I suppose, but also the people doing the othering.
It seems so.
Let's do a very quick plot summary.
This never fails.
This never fails.
This never takes the entire episode.
And if we'd like, maybe we can each take a book and we'll go through. There's 5 books, right? I feel like I read that there were 5 books and then it felt like there were 4. And maybe I'm going crazy.
There's 4 and then an epilogue.
There's 4 books and an epilogue. The first book is about, so there's a mouse society in this, I assume, English castle. It must be English because there's a French mouse and they all speak English.
Yeah, they do call her out as a French mouse.
Despereaux is a very, very tiny mouse who should never have survived his birth, and yet he has. He does not like doing mouse things. He likes music and reading and stories and dreaming about being a knight and falling in love. One day he meets the Princess P, who was a human woman, and he falls in love, and he talks to her, and he talks to the king, and that's a big no-no in mouse society. So they sentence him to death, and they throw him in the dungeon to be eaten by the rats.
Yeah, there's a number of chapters that just deal with the trial and carrying out of the sentence of Despereaux's exile unto death.
And even his father votes to throw him in the dungeon.
Yeah, and his brother is the one to do it.
Yeah.
And his mom...
A deep betrayal.
is just very melodramatic about the whole thing and does nothing to try to stop it.
Perfidy is the word that they keep bringing up.
I did have to look that up.
I also had to look it up.
Me too.
The book requests you look it up.
Yeah.
And thus we did.
It's definitely one of those words where just by reading the context, you're like, I have a general idea of what this word means, but I did have to look it up just to clarify exactly what it means.
Yeah. And it's interesting that the narrator even points that out, I think at one point, saying Despereaux is experiencing a great sense of perfidy. Do you know what it means? You may want to look it up, but you probably already have an idea. And I remember even before I looked it up, and it seems both of you did as well, you did maybe think to yourself, do I have an idea of what this is? And just the emotional context of what Despereaux was going through and the narrator's prompting to put you in his position did give you that sense, that feeling, such that the definition was more of just a layer on top of it. Very interesting.
Oh, and then Despereaux does meet Gregory, who is the human jailer, who cannot navigate the dungeons because they're labyrinthine in their design.
Yeah.
He cannot navigate them, so he has to tie a rope around himself in order to always be able to find his way back to the rope's origin. And they live in total darkness. And Gregory rescues Despereaux from the rats, and then we learn no more about their fate because the book pivots very dramatically to the tale of a rat.
It goes back in time to before Despereaux was born to the tale of chiaroscuro, who is a rat that, and this is where it starts getting, when I read this part, I was like, oh, we're getting into it now, where it's like chiaroscuro, named after a word that means the mixture of light and dark, because rats have a funny sense of humor, even though they live totally in the dark. And chiaroscuro has grown up basically with the understanding that rats live in the dark and they're supposed to take pleasure in evil, nefarious things, namely torturing other prisoners. There's a rat named Butticelli Rimorso, who sort of acts as a mentor in that regard for chiaroscuro, or Riscuro, as his friends call him. And there's a whole sequence where Roscuro tortures this prisoner who was imprisoned for some reason or other, but he learns that this guy had basically sold his daughter for like a tablecloth, and he tortures this guy and steals the tablecloth by making him trust him, giving up his secrets, and then telling him, you're a bad person, you're a bad dad, I'm going to take your stuff. And then Roscuro gets a chance to go up into the castle proper, where he sees the light, and he's enamored with it. It lights a fire in his soul, and he finds a ball underway, a big celebration with the king and the queen and the Princess P. And Roscuro is hanging around. He climbs up onto a chandelier. The Princess P, always observant, points out to everyone, there's a rat. And then Roscuro, falls into the queen's soup bowl, and the queen has a heart attack from fright, from the impropriety of it all, and falls over and dies. And Roscuro scurries away, but not before looking back once to see the absolute disdain and hatred that the Princess P has for him. And he carries that sense of, he sort of embraces this feeling of, I'm awful, and returns to the darkness of the dungeon and starts formulating a plot to get his revenge against, I guess, people in general, but especially the Princess P for looking at him so hatefully. And then we jump back even further in time to the tale of one Migri Sao, a young human peasant girl who is arriving at the castle around the same time that Chiaroscuro is hatching his plot, which again is still some years before Despereaux was born. So we jump back even further in time to the tale of Migri Sao.
Yeah. Just quickly jumping in, we also learn in Roscuro's story that this is the reason why soup is banned in the kingdom.
Yes.
Because the queen loved soup. But because not only is the king reminded of his wife when people eat soup, but also it was tied to the way that she died, he bans soup from the kingdom. He literally sends soldiers... And spoons.
And bowls.
Yeah. You're not allowed to have anything that could allow you to make or consume soup. So he goes and basically confiscates a bunch of pots and bowls and spoons and throws them into the dungeon. And
listeners of the show will know how much we love soup.
We do love soup.
That was painful to read.
It was devastating. I was just thinking about, what is life without soup? Very sad.
Yeah.
As a kid, I was never a huge soup person.
Ooh.
As I've grown older, I'm like, this stuff is essential.
But yeah. So Migri Sao, she is a peasant girl. When she was young, she was sold by her father for some cigarettes, a hen, and a red tablecloth.
Good deal.
Man, I wonder who her father was. Woo. This is shortly after her own mother passes away of illness. And so the man that she is sold to is very abusive. He often hits Migri, particularly on her ears, and so her ears get really bruised, and all the scar tissue that grows there over the years actually ends up taking away some of her hearing as well. But obviously the issue is only exacerbated by the fact that she can't hear this man give her orders, and so the less she can hear, the more he hits her. After a few years of this, the king's soldiers come by and they're like, you're not allowed to own humans. So they decide to take Migri and bring her to the castle, where she becomes a servant. At the castle, she has these dreams of grandeur of one day being a princess, but as a servant, she's not very good at her job. But again, it's similarly because she can't hear when people tell her to do things, etc., etc. Eventually, after being passed around from department to department, I guess, she ends up being the assistant to the cook. And her job is to bring food down to Gregory, the jailer. And so I think it's the first time she brings food down to him is when she meets Roscuro. And the book describes it as he's able to speak in the exact frequency that I imagine it's in the tunnel of her ear. The voice travels perfectly so that she can hear him perfectly well. And because of that, he becomes basically the little rat on her shoulder who's just telling her here's my plan. And he takes advantage of her dreams of becoming a princess to hatch this plan to kidnap the Princess P, he tells Miggery that she will be replacing the princess and that the princess will become her servant. But in reality, he's just going to lock Princess P in the dungeon and take over the castle himself.
I think he just wanted revenge on the princess.
Gotcha.
His plans of revenge are very singular, and they don't extend past, I'm going to punish this one specific person.
Yeah, that makes sense.
It's pretty much that. It's like he wanted to take this source of light and laughter that had, in his mind, been quite like exclusively rejecting of his ability to access light and laughter, and he wants to just trap it in the dungeon, just as like a comeuppance, which is the word that they use. He described it as a divine comeuppance.
Yes. But during this whole plan, when Miggery brings the tray of food down to Gregory, sleight of hand places Despereaux on the tray under a napkin. And so when Miggery brings the tray back up, she is inadvertently rescuing Despereaux. And Despereaux overhears the whole plan, rescues whole plan. Unfortunately, when Despereaux is trying to escape the kitchen, he gets his tail cut off by the cook. Or no, by Miggery.
Yeah.
Who was ordered by the cook to kill Despereaux. So Despereaux, out of exhaustion and pain and fear, passes out on a sack of flour, which is a very nice image. I mean, besides the missing tail. Rescuer immediately enacts his plan. Not a second wasted.
Yeah.
Kidnaps the princess, brings Miggery and the princess down into the dungeon, reveals his deception to Miggery, and everyone's very sad and depressed. He also bites the rope of Gregory in twain, and Gregory, unable to find his way in the dungeon, dies of fright.
I guess so.
Yeah.
That's what it was described as.
He basically is like, I mean, I can kind of understand where it's like you're down in this dungeon for so long that you almost lose your sense of self, and your one lifeline is this rope that allows you to find your way around. And then if that was cut, I don't know if I would like die.
Hey, I mean, if I had a nickel for every time somebody died of fright in this book, I'd have 2 nickels.
But I can imagine it would be so emotionally just devastating to be like, I'm stuck in this dark dungeon and I don't even know where I am or how to find my way back.
Yes. At the same time, Gregory's a weird dude.
Yeah.
I don't know. I was going to say, I think he could last, but then I'm like, then again, I don't know.
Again, it's like he's been down there for so long.
Yeah.
It's not a great job.
He's got his own personal belief system that's shattered when the rope is severed.
I guess so.
So all the king's horses and all the king's men descend into the dungeon, and they cannot find the princess because it's like a labyrinth. Who built this thing? Why is it like this? Despereaux goes to the king and says, I know the plan. I know where your daughter is. The king is so stubborn and so heartbroken that he just simply cannot fathom taking advice from a mouse. So Despereaux, with the help of one of the mice's thread masters, who is sympathetic to his cause.
Seems so.
Like some sort of like sacred mouse position, who is like partially helps execute Despereaux, but also like gives him hope, arms Despereaux with a needle sword and a spool of the princess's twine, and he goes in like, oh man, Theseus? Is that the guy?
Oh,
no.
Yeah.
He's Minotaur
Theseus
guy.
in the labyrinth.
Yeah. He's doing a Theseus, except he doesn't because he immediately loses the twine and then he runs into his
I mean, it's like the spool of thread is bigger than he is. So rolling it is a bigger feat than you would imagine.
Yeah. And he has to go down the stairs.
He immediately drops it down the stairs.
Yeah, he passes through the kitchen, and the cook, who's so distraught.
The cook is making soup.
Yeah, she's having a crisis, and so she's like, forget it. I know it's illegal, but I'm going to make soup.
Yeah.
And she finds Despereaux, and because times are so topsy-turvy, she goes, here you go, mouse, here's some soup.
And Despereaux dunks his whole body in the soup because what else is he going to do?
Yeah.
And then he smells of soup. So when he goes down into the dungeon, he has no light, he has no sense of direction, but he's like, I gotta do it, because I have no choice. And he meets Rescuro's friend, Remorso, who decides to do what rats do and play an evil trick on Despereaux and say, I will lead Despereaux to the princess, and in his moment of hope, I will eat him. And then he'll taste so good because of the hope or whatnot.
A bunch of rats follow them with the whole, kind of just as like a mass of like, ooh, mouse blood, ooh, tasty, we can't wait. And Remorso's like, he's mine, don't get any ideas. And so you have this sort of audience leading up to this finale.
But at the same time, Princess P and Miggery are having a conversation, and they're actually starting to empathize with each other because they've both lost their mothers, and they both don't want to be here, and they've both been betrayed. And so Miggery, who's armed with this big, like, cleaver, essentially, turns on Roscuro just in time for Despereaux to arrive. And so Meguri Sao chops off Roscuro's tail, and Despereaux holds him at needlepoint. And the Princess P uses this moment where everyone's at a standstill to come to an understanding with Roscuro. What does he want? Why is he doing this? And empathize with him and offer him
forgiveness.
Yeah, a pardon. Not like a royal pardon, but like, forgiveness, like you said.
No, it's interesting. They describe it, I think it's like twice where it happens, where someone offers forgiveness, or at least the Princess P does offer
and Despereaux
forgiveness.
forgives his father, too.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and in both cases, it's described as like Despereaux forgave his father and the Princess P forgave Roscuro, ultimately more for themselves so that they could heal. They could begin the process of healing their heart correctly than anything else, which is very interesting. A very mature concept.
Yeah, and with that, they are all led out of the dungeon, and they have soup! Hooray!
Hooray!
And happily ever after, so to speak, in the best possible sense of it, as Despereaux so desperately wanted. And that's the Tale of Despereaux. So it is very complicated, emotionally complicated.
Yeah.
I think the scene that was most impactful to me was that big scene in the dungeon when Princess P and Meguri are talking. And I don't remember how exactly it goes, but the narrator basically says, no one's ever asked Meguri what she really wants. I mean, she always says, like, I want to be a princess. I want this. I want to order people around and not be a servant anymore. But when Princess P actually asks her, what do you want? It's like the first time Meguri finally breaks down, is like, I just want my mom.
And it's like, oh.
And it's like, aw. And Princess P is like, yeah, me too. I thought that was very impactful.
Yeah.
Especially because she's just been kidnapped by this girl. And it would be difficult for a lot of people to try and empathize with someone who woke you up in the middle of the night and was like, I have a knife. Come with me to the dungeon, Especially like her being a princess as well. Like she could easily be like, well, I am much higher station than you. I don't have to do what you say, blah, blah, blah. But yeah, they realize even though they're in such different walks of life, they actually have a lot of similarities.
Top 10 anime moments.
Yeah.
Top 10 emotional anime outbursts.
It is interesting because reading it, essentially most of the book for the first time, or at least the first time in a very, very long time, Roscuro and Meguri are both written in an extremely sympathetic way. And even if they do have, Roscuro especially, like a villainous turn, you can never truly hate them because you know so much about them. And and it sort of becomes like the princess becomes like this almost like antagonizing force, not for any fault of her own, but we just get overloaded by these like other perspectives.
Yeah,
and
that's true. Like in Roscuro's story, you do feel for him because he technically didn't do anything wrong. He didn't go to the party intending to kill the queen or anything. He just was like, I like watching people be happy, and so I'm gonna sit on the chandelier and watch the festivities. But Princess P just like has this like hatred for him because she feels like he's responsible for the queen's death. And so yeah, like you can understand both sides in this scenario. I
love it when stories do that, when stories tell different sides of the event or events from different characters' perspectives, and so we get the full 360 roundabout emotional scope of everyone's feelings. But yeah, and then you sort of understand Roscuro and Meguri Sao's perspectives, and then the princess in turn must redeem herself at the end. Not because she's done anything wrong, but just emotionally from a reader's perspective.
Yeah.
Now we need that. It's almost like Despereaux is the only totally pure character who is doing things because he knows it's right.
Yeah.
And he's just so small and the whole world just beats down on him.
Poor little mouse. I do also think it's like true to life, especially like as a kid, you might accidentally say or do something to someone else that you didn't intend to be hurtful, but maybe it really was. And sure, you could argue like, was that right or wrong? But I think it's more important that you acknowledge that you hurt someone and that you reconcile that.
Yeah. Completely running us off track. But thinking about the Mouse Society was really fascinating.
Most honorable head mouse.
Most honorable head mouse. They have a council.
Yeah.
They have mouse laws. They have a little drum.
Yeah, they summon the council with a drum.
They have positions and jobs, I think, even though it seems like they don't really have a need for. It's all sort of like customs and culture and symbolic roles, but the actual like day-to-day lives of the mice is very much just we run around, we eat crumbs, we chew paper. It's great.
Yeah.
We don't need any of this society building, but yet we have it because it makes us feel important and good.
Their phone book is just a list of mouse names, and then the occupation next to it reads, just a little guy.
Yeah. And their relationship with the people and the rats and their sort of like middleman, don't get involved political stance where they can talk to people, but they don't because they know that the people don't think it's right for them to talk. And so they like relegate themselves to this subservient role, and then they police their own people to maintain the subservient role because they don't think they could win.
What, a shooting war? What?
I don't know.
I think it's more about like, we don't want to disrupt the status quo.
Yeah.
I mean, maybe part of it is because like when Roscuro like made himself known to the humans, immediately like rats were banned from the kingdom.
Yeah.
Which like, how do you... Isn't it like when...
Rats are illegal.
Yeah, rats are illegal.
But how do you enforce that?
But how do you enforce that? Doesn't Despereaux go to the king and is like, the rats took Princess P, and the king is like, but rats aren't allowed here.
Yeah.
And I'm just like, okay.
Yeah.
But
we can all be Alberta.
Yeah, like maybe the mice saw that happen and were like, okay, we're good right now. We're not the rats. We're not stuck in the dungeon. As long as the humans don't know about us, we should be good where we are. You know? So maybe for them, they feel like Despereaux talking to a human, particularly the king and the princess who have the power to effectively ban mice from the castle, it puts their whole society at risk.
If the king banned mice, do you think all the mice would just go, all right, and leave?
I don't know. There's a lot of like talk of like what's sort of how are things supposed to be, and it's all based on like precedents. It's a lot of based off of like precedents that is also exists alongside fear of vague retributions. I don't think the Mouse Council ever gets really clear to my memory what the consequences for a mouse talking to a human are, aside from maybe it just brings too much attention and they'll bring, you know, the fist down on us. They'll try and clear us out of the walls or whatever.
There's a lot of just, it's not how it's done.
Yeah.
It's just not how it's done. There's something wrong with this very smart mouse.
Yeah. He doesn't scurry. He doesn't, you know, nibble on the pages of books.
He reads.
He reads.
He stares wistfully into the light of the stained glass window.
Yeah.
He was born with his eyes open.
Yeah. They emphasize that a lot. It's like, okay.
Maybe it's something to do with like born curious, born being able to see things the other mice can't.
I think it's just, I mean, yeah, like baby mice when they're born, like they don't open their eyes for a while. So I think for them, they're just like, this is a weird mouse.
But like metaphorically.
Yeah, I know. But it's just like, I'm trying to like, not only the metaphorical interpretation, but also like just in real life, if you're born a little different from other people, they will find ways to like pick at it or like other you for something that you had no control over. Like Despereaux wasn't as a baby being like, I'm going to open my eyes and like freak everyone out. He just was like, I'm going to open my eyes. I was just born.
What, you weren't fully conscious as a newborn baby with a sense of social propriety and how to undermine it? Was that just me? Well, okay. No,
I believe it. No, I'm kidding.
So it's like Despereaux was born different from the other mice, but he fully accepts that, and even like he's even like proud of it, or not proud of it, but like he doesn't see anything wrong with himself, and so he fully accepts the consequences of being different. Whereas Skiro wasn't necessarily born different, but like has like a big character building moment and becomes different, but then faces so much backlash for it that he doubles down and tries to like fit into the norm so aggressively that he decides to kidnap a member of the royal family.
Yeah.
And then Meguri Sao wasn't born different, but her circumstances were so devastating that she becomes someone to be othered. And the othering of her exacerbates that othering. And the princess moms died.
Which is
sucks.
tough.
Which sucks. That's bad. She doesn't fit into my analysis, though, so I'm just going to put her over there.
It's interesting, though. It makes me think of what you said about Despereaux being, like, the only truly pure character. In a sense, I almost feel like that goes a little bit to the Princess P as well. The book brings up a lot. At a certain point, once it's like laid out all of its pieces in play, it talks about consequences. You know, because this happened, then this happened. Because this character did this, it prompted this character to go down this path, or so on or so forth. And it seems like the point where it really stops is the moment when Princess P forgives Roscuro. And she does it even just for herself. But it opens up like this new path to like, you know, suddenly these consequences that have all been like tumbling down the path of fate are able to just sort of release. And it sort of performs this like reset, which of course the book makes clear, you know, nothing would have happened if Despereaux hadn't, charged by the power of love and you know, a feeling of truth and righteousness, gone into the dungeon against all doubt and fear and just went for it. That is an interesting thing as well. The book talks about irrational emotions with great power, like the compulsion to make us do things that we wouldn't expect, and how those can be both helpful and harmful, or good and bad. One interesting thing I like how it talks about with Miguri Sao in terms of emotions is that her hope, which it even says, reader, this, you know, Miguri Sao's hope to become a princess is entirely irrational and likely will not amount to anything. But is it valuable if it means something to her?
Yeah. There's so many like little pockets of like just wisdom interwoven in not very much text, I guess, which is really impressive.
Did y'all have a moment where you thought, kind of like when Jino was younger and first picked up this book, that it was going to be one kind of story and then realized it was going in a different direction?
I definitely expected a much more traditional hero story kind of tale. I think I was similar to Jino, where I didn't remember that there were multiple storylines. I mostly only remembered the titular character of Despereaux, but even then I was kind of like, okay, I remember there's a mouse and there's a princess. Couldn't tell you very much else about it.
I guess for you, Jino, it was something you realized earlier on when you first tried reading the book, and then realized that it was going to go in a different direction. Did you have that returning to it, where you knew that this wasn't going to be quite a heroic tale in the vein of, I suppose, our closest comparison is Redwall? Did you remember that going into it, or did it take you by surprise?
No, absolutely by surprise. It was like, oh, we're not with Despereaux anymore. Oh, okay, I guess we're with Roscuro. Oh, here's this third character who has nothing to do, at least at first.
Yeah.
Nothing to do with the first two characters. How is this going to fit in? So it definitely, I mean, I think it's intentional. You know, there's a little bit of whiplash. Like, in order to fully comprehend Despereaux's story, you need the context of all these other characters, and you need to empathize with everyone before you can, I guess, before you're allowed to return to the little mouse of the pure heart.
Yeah. I was just thinking about, like, if Redwall had focused on, we talked about this in the Redwall episode where it's very much like, these are vermin, the rats and the stoats and the weasels. They're just born evil. I think Despereaux has like a different worldview to Redwall, where it's like, yeah, the rats, they kind of have taken on this mantle of we live in the dark and we're evil, but clearly that's not all there is to it. There's like a reason why they have this worldview. There's a reason why Roscuro is the way that he is. It's exacerbated by not only their life circumstances, but also just by other rats who are just like, I think the rats are also similar to the Mouse Council, where they're like, this is our normal.
Yeah.
Anything outside of that status quo is unacceptable.
Yeah.
So it is interesting to compare Despereaux's world building with Redwall's world building.
The rats also sort of self-justify themselves too, because everyone going into the dungeon is either a prisoner who has, you know, theoretically done something bad to deserve the dungeon, or a mouse exile who has supposedly done something bad to deserve mouse exile. So they're not doing anything, at least in their own worldview, they're not doing anything bad to anyone who doesn't deserve it. And the fact that they take great pleasure in these, quote, wicked deeds is just like it's a cool side effect for them.
Yeah.
But they're like, oh, we're not evil. This is just what we do. And it's good that we do it because, you know,
because
no one would care if So.
Which makes me think about Roscuro's interaction with Miguri's father, where at the time you don't know it. You're just like, this guy like sold his daughter for a tablecloth. Yeah, like he sucks. But when he reunites with Miggery, suddenly you're so happy for the both of them. And I think that also is another lesson in empathy. You might not know the full story of like why someone did the things that they did. And you can't be as quick to judge, I guess. Yeah.
Yeah. Or at the very least, if you do cast judgment, you can also reserve the finality of that judgment in a way.
Yeah. The book doesn't tell you how you're supposed to feel about anything. And in this situation, it's like, yeah, like her father was still wrong to have sold her for basically nothing. But he does regret it. And he's trying to do better for his daughter now.
What you were saying earlier about if Redwall was written like Despereaux, it would almost be like we get a little bit of Mattias' story. Why does Mattias do what he does? And then we go back and we get Clooney, like Clooney as a child. Why is he so hell-bent on attacking this castle with footmen? And then we go back and we're like, and here's some foxes. And here's why they do what they do, or something like that. Or we get like a random Constance backstory. But then instead of Desperate, where everyone comes to understand each other, they all just slaughter each other.
I mean, it would be such a different vibe.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, I don't think like Redwall was wrong to have this very clear protagonist-antagonist setup. Obviously,
it's just a different story.
We loved Redwall, and we were like, yeah! Like, I don't know. As we were recording that episode, I was thinking like, or like, Jino, you said in future Redwall books, they do have a protagonist who is one of the quote-unquote vermin. So I thought that would be interesting just to see like how the author then handles that like flipped perspective. After years of writing, they are like born evil and they can only do evil things or whatever.
Yeah. Not to like delve, because I know this is like a hot topic, controversial topic even, but the recent growing acknowledgement of the idea of the quote evil race, like all orcs and goblins and rats, and
is that like moral essentialism or something, or species essentialism?
Yeah, something like that. Like you have a whole group of people and they're the bad guys, and it's okay to destroy them because they're bad and there's nothing else that could ever possibly be. And the people pushing back and saying like that's not how anything works. And especially like promoting that sort of worldview, it can very easily translate to like a real world, like terrible, terrible mindset.
Yeah.
I mean, it's so complicated because it's like on one hand, it is a fantasy world. And so the laws of the fantasy world can be different from the laws of the regular world. I don't know what to call it.
Yeah.
Yeah. But you know what I mean. But yeah, I do think like it could be potentially harmful to have the idea of a completely like evil race where you're just completely justified in killing them or whatnot.
If you want your good guy army to be completely morally justifiable, make them fight robots. Oh no, the robots have feelings! Oh, no,
It's an interesting thought experiment and a challenge for almost the opposite perspective, where if the idea of no moral essentialism among your various like fantastical species, whether it's, you know, Tolkien-esque or whether it's just mice and rats and humans, if you presuppose the basis of someone who's used to that sort of free-for-all, no one's totally right or wrong, looking for ways to understand or empathize, and then you give them a world in which the rules are, well, there is one group that is explicitly desirous of your destruction, whether you want to call that evil or not. It explicitly desires your torture and untimely end. Then it becomes a different sort of what do you do with that sort of thing. For the Tale of Despereaux, it's interesting what y'all were talking about with the idea that the rats themselves are like, we do exist in the dark and we do like to torture people and that's our thing. And it's a thing that should be because we are rats, and that's how it is. And I mean, one could argue in a weird roundabout way that when Rhaenyra tortures Miguel-Sao's father with like the true darkness of his deeds, it sort of brings him to a point where he breaks down and has to admit to himself that he did something wrong. So there's a weird, in the way that the Tale of Despereaux is very existential and thought-provoking, there's a somewhat unstated notion of the necessity of descending into this very metaphorical, labyrinthine space of the dungeon to accomplish a transformation, or in the case of Rhaenyra, to see the light. I keep trying to find my way to a point, but much like we discovered at the start of this episode, it's hard to find an answer for things that simply are.
Yeah, I mean, it just gives you a lot of food for thought. And
Soup for thought?
Soup for thought, yes. Ooh,
Stone soup
similar
for
to
thought.
soup, this book is also slightly intangible.
And tasty.
Yeah.
And full of vitamins and minerals.
It kind of makes me actually wish that I remembered reading this book more, because I'm curious what my, let's say I was like 7 years old, what my 7-year-old brain gleaned from this book. Like, I wonder if I was able to get the nuances of this book as much, or maybe it was actually like clearer to me as a kid, where I was just like, yep, it's important to understand everyone's perspectives. And that was that. But unfortunately, like, I don't remember reading this book.
Perhaps if there is a message to be taken from the book, it is that there is always a tale to be told. No matter how up the guy is, he's trying to do something to you, there's always a tale to be told.
Truthfully, yes. And also, in addition to that, soup is good.
Soup. Sometimes when things are looking bleak, you gotta make some soup, even if it's illegal.
Yeah, that's not even, I'm not even being cheeky with that. The book, after spending a lot of time talking about consequences and perfidy and love, and it just takes a while to be like, hey, you think about soup. Ain't soup just great?
Chicken leek and garlic soup.
I
gotta cook with leeks more.
I mean, I just love how the resolution of the book is, and they all went upstairs and ate soup.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm also just thinking about how this book I think maybe this is like the main message, but just the idea that who you are is obviously a cause of not only like the circumstances you were born into, but the events that happen to you, and understanding that about yourself and about other people is important. Yeah.
Yeah.
And if I may propose yet another possible moral, there's something about, I don't remember exactly what you said. I think maybe Michael said it, or Victoria. There's only two options here.
Maybe you said it.
I certainly did it. Something about how the whole story is just like this chaotic ball of intent and vengeance sort of rolling down, and then it stops when the Princess P forgives Rhaenyra, and it sort of dissipates everything. Something about how, like, you know how you have like two warring ranch families who just like every generation they just like shoot at each other for generations.
Blood feud.
It only takes like one person deciding this is going to stop and I'm going to forgive someone.
Yeah. It's really, really hard to do. But sometimes you can just turn around and say, wait, hold on. Why are you doing this? What do you want? And then I'm going to let this go. If you can let this go, let's have some soup. Maybe that's all it takes.
It gives me some Gregor vibes too.
Yeah.
I mean, this whole book gave me some slight Gregor vibes just due to the nature of rats and being in the dark and all that stuff. But it's like a similar to the end of Gregor the Overlander, where it's up to Luxa and Ripred deciding we are going to form this alliance.
When you want to tell a story about morality and existentialism and empathy, just add some verticality and then put some rodents at the bottom. And you'll have an excellent story for the kids.
Yeah. I think you're definitely on the right track, Jino. Like, there's definitely this idea that it just takes one person deciding to essentially like stop the dominoes for... Because otherwise it would just keep going. Like, if the Princess P had ended up in the dungeon forever, then the king would probably like...
collapse the dungeon.
Yeah, collapse the dungeons or like do something.
Outlaw having a daughter.
Yeah.
That's not a great way to continue the lineage
Let's
of
talk about the
people.
king for a second. The king needs better coping mechanisms.
Yeah.
The king's gone through so much tragedy, and yet you can't help but feel a little frustrated for him every time he's in a scene.
Yeah.
'Cause you're like, come on, man, you're the king.
Because you're like, you're the king.
Yeah. I love
not
how
a
the
bug.
narrator describes him as like the king had like so many faults. But the one thing that could definitely be said to his credit is that he could love with a full heart. And you're like, oh, that's both the strength and a flaw there.
Yeah. It's like loving a lot is obviously a good thing, and having a big heart is good. But if you love something too much and then it's taken away from you, and then you basically just close yourself off to the world to like deal with that loss, then not being a very good person or a very good king for that matter. Like the whole kingdom was basically like,
I can't have soup?
like, what do I cook with?
Yeah.
Because he took their pots. Like he didn't even think about like, oh, you can use a pot to like make other things. People just had to only cook with pans.
It's skillet scrambles for the entire kingdom.
And thus the casserole was born.
Put it on a stick.
Hypothetically, someone could still make soup in a pan if they had like a slightly deeper. No, it would not be.
The king, frankly, wouldn't be able to put that together, though.
Yeah.
He'd be like, soup in a pan?
Yeah.
Soup goes in bowls.
Yeah.
This is not a bowl. This is a very wide cup. This is not soup. This is water with stuff in it.
Maybe the king is the one true bad. No, I'm kidding.
His wife
It's a bold
died.
statement.
Give him-
I know. I'm
cut
kidding.
him
I'm
some
kidding.
slack.
No, but of the characters, we get the least of the king.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
He plays music for his daughter. That's nice.
No, yeah.
A head of
Plays
state.
guitar.
Yeah, head of state taking a moment. Maybe they're in Spain. No. Are they in Italy or Skiro?
No, I was thinking that. I was like, is this actually set in France? Then I was looking up on the Wikipedia to be like, did I just say that at the beginning of the episode? Like, did I make that up? Despereaux's mom is French, but the other mice are kind of like, she's a French mouse, as if like that's like different. So maybe.
What are their other names?
This might take place in Italy. And if I'm super, super wrong, cut this out.
Well, they do give us a kingdom name at one point. It's like the Kingdom of Dor or something. D-O-R, I think.
Okay. She was a French mouse who had arrived at the castle long ago in the luggage of a visiting French diplomat. So it's to be presumed that this is not France.
Right.
Because they would not be receiving French diplomats.
Right, but the question is it Italy?
I think it might be. I don't know.
It doesn't affect the story at all. This story takes place in the great nation of Canada.
What if I was like, wait,
I'm just like looking up other
this
names.
is Italian morality? This is
like-
Italian existentialism? Well, we gotta use a whole different set of tools now.
Despereaux's aunt is named Aunt Florence. He has an uncle named Uncle Alfred.
No, it's true. It's possible.
Alfred, short for
Alfredo?
Alfredo.
He has a sibling named Furlough.
Furlough?
He has a sister named Merlot.
No.
Maybe it's just a hodgepodge.
Oh, but like it doesn't
Maybe
matter.
we're in Luxembourg.
Like his siblings aren't the greatest reference because they were also named by their mothers, so they could have French names as well.
That's true.
Honestly, I don't know if Luxembourg is a hodgepodge. I shouldn't just...
Switzerland?
On
feels even less
Wikipedia, it
hodgepodgey.
categorizes Despereaux
Then
as
again,
a
I also
book
don't know
set in
Luxembourg,
France.
so it could be even more hodgepodge.
Isn't there a country that starts with a B that has a lot of...
Brazil.
Belgium.
No. Yeah, Belgium.
Brussels?
Isn't Belgium like there's a French quarter and then there's German quarter or third or whatever? Isn't that Belgium?
I don't know.
Am I insulting all of Belgium right now?
Yeah, I'm not sure where they are. But I think we can confidently say it's not France.
Yeah.
So I take back what I said at the very, very beginning of the episode where I was like, this is a very French mouse.
I genuinely don't remember you ever saying...
It's because we were doing the whole like American bit.
Oh. See, this is something that
years.
this is something the audience may not have context for, even if they listen from the very start. Jino attempted an intro to the episode and spoke, in my opinion, in a regular Jino voice. And Victoria was like, why do you sound Australian? You don't have to do your Australian impression.
I apologize. I had such like an overreaction to like you trying to start the episode that it totally derailed the start of the episode.
I'm sorry, I'm throwing you under the bus.
It's okay.
Yeehaw.
I
Yeehaw? Beans and biscuits. That's a spicy meatball.
I think it's just...
That's a spicy meatball.
I just think Jino's Australian accent is really funny. So
We've yet to find out if Australia thinks that.
Hello, country of
listening?
Australia. Country and continent of Australia.
Are you listening from Australia? Write in. Tell us if Jino's accent personally offends you.
Okay, well, any last thoughts about the Tale of Despereaux? Is Despereaux the best mouse with sword?
No.
I admire him.
Yeah.
I admire him a great deal.
I mean to dunk on Despereaux like that. No, he's great.
That was so immediate and just, yeah, get out of here, Despereaux.
Mattias will always be my mouse with sword.
Mattias is pretty great.
Yeah, Despereaux's not Catholic enough.
Yeah. I mean, the mouse with sword part really only comes in at the end. For
same with
Despereaux.
Mattias. He doesn't get the sword until the very end.
Well,
That's
Despereaux
true.
gets a
But he's like on a
knitting
quest
needle,
to get the
sewing
sword for like most of the book.
Yeah.
Yeah.
By the time Mattias gets that sword, you're like, yeah.
Finally.
Yeah. Spiritually, it's been mouse with sword this whole time.
Yeah.
Mhm. Thanks for listening to Nostalgia Club. If you like this episode, give us a rating. We can see you guys not doing it. And it really, we really need it. We got to pay the bills, which is separate from the fact that you need to give us a rating. And you can comment too, and you can email us at nostalgicalpodcast@gmail.com if you have suggestions for the show. And you can follow us on Instagram at Nostalgia Club Podcast. And we also have a Twitter. And if you find it, congratulations.
You are Tony Abbott.
You are Tony Abbott.
Hey, big shout out to Tony Abbott.
I know,
On the
yeah.
off chance he's listening to this one. Very sweet guy, a lot of grace and gentility,
Yeah.
responding to our very unhinged Season 1 Droon episode.
Tony, I'm so sorry about what I said about
Truly
Max.
a highlight of my life.
I don't
though.
take any of it back. I don't like him. He's a big spider with a man's head.
Well, not everything can be for everyone. Droon's a big place.
That's so valid. We'll be back next week with another episode, our last episode of Season 3.
And it will also be full of rodents.
Oh, yeah.
Man, I wonder what it's going to be. Leave your guesses in the comments.
B-Movie 2.
Electric Boogaloo.
One of my initial thoughts was because Despereaux falls in love with Princess P, and I was like, is this like the B movie? Did Despereaux walk so that Barry B. Benson could fly?
Their ship name is D.
I kind of like it, though.
Or Peace Bro.
Although the author does make a point at the end of the book to be like, but he can't be with Princess P.
Yeah, that was never going to happen. They are two different species.
Yeah. And I was like, okay, respect. Anyways, until next time.
When everything is on fire, the economy's down, times are uncertain, you don't know what's going to happen, make some soup.
Yeah. This has been an official Nostalgia Club PSA.
You might go to jail for it, but make some soup.
Share it with a mouse.
Share it with the mouse. Aw.